She said, "I'm the Surgeon General of California." They cuffed her anyway. What happened next, caught on body cam, shook an entire police unit in just 8 minutes. Dr. Maya Ellison, one of the highest-ranking health officials in the state, was profiled, detained, and humiliated steps from the Capitol. But she didn't shout. She didn't resist. She responded with precision. Watch what happened. Like, share, and subscribe for more real stories that matter. It was just past 6:30 in the evening when Dr. Maya Ellison stepped into Level B3 of the state government parking structure in downtown Sacramento. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting pale reflections across the slick concrete floor. Outside, a storm had just passed. Rain still clung to her hood, dripping in quiet rhythm as she walked toward her state-issued black hybrid SUV. She moved like someone who had spent the day on her feet, steady, purposeful, shoulders tense but composed. She had just finished an 11-hour emergency planning session with the governor's public health task force. Fires were flaring in the north, hospitals were nearing capacity in the south, and in between, she'd chaired a classified coordination briefing on pandemic contingency infrastructure. Her mind was still half in the war room, calculating ICU overflow metrics, memorizing logistics routes, weighing countermeasure deployment timelines. She was already thinking of the policy addendum she needed to send by midnight. But as she reached into her coat pocket for her key fob, footsteps shattered the quiet. Fast, hard, echoing down the garage like a warning. "Hands where I can see them!" The voice cracked the air like a whip. Male, forceful, unfamiliar. Maya turned slowly, instinctively raising both hands with calm deliberation. 2 uniformed Capitol security officers were rushing toward her, guns drawn, flashlight beams slicing through the shadows. One was tall and red-faced, late 40s maybe, all puffed up muscle and no patience. The other, younger, wiry, barely keeping pace, had a twitch in his jaw that betrayed nerves. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle," the younger one barked, his flashlight trembling slightly. Maya stood still. "Officers," she began, her voice low and measured. "My name is Dr. Maya Ellison. I'm the—" "Don't move," the tall one snapped, cutting her off. "We got a report about a suspicious person tampering with vehicles. You match the description." Maya blinked, confused, but not surprised. "This is my vehicle. I work for the state. My badge—" "Against the wall. Now." There was no pause. No inquiry. No one asked for ID. No clarification. Just an instant shift from suspicion to action. The tall officer rushed forward and grabbed her wrist with trained aggression, spinning her toward the concrete pillar. Her laptop bag thudded to the ground. One cuff clicked tight, metal against bone. Maya winced, but didn't cry out. "Is this really happening?" she asked, not to them, but to herself. She didn't scream, didn't resist. She simply allowed the second cuff to lock into place behind her back, her face brushing cold concrete. Her state-issued ID badge, clearly marked with her photo, title, and clearance level, slipped from her coat pocket and landed at the taller officer's feet. He didn't even glance at it. "I am the Surgeon General of California," she said, breathing slowly. "I am not armed. I am not resisting. You need to verify who I am." The younger officer scoffed. "People like you always say that. Makes no difference." That stopped her. "People like you." She turned her head slightly to meet his eyes. "What exactly do you mean by that?" He didn't answer. The taller one was already rummaging through her laptop bag, pulling out her secure tablet, her encrypted phone, a sealed file folder marked Confidential. "Eyes only." "What is this? Some kind of device?" "It's a state-issued medical encryption pad," she said calmly. "You can scan the serial code on the back. Or, here's an idea, you could read my ID." But they didn't. They kept prodding, kept searching, acting like they had already decided who she was, or more precisely, who she wasn't. Maya didn't flinch, but inside, something fractured, not from fear, but from the sharp sting of recognition. She had seen this before, too many times, not just in news reports or distant headlines, but in the eyes of her own friends, doctors in Detroit, engineers in Atlanta, veterans in San Diego, respected, accomplished, reduced. And now it was her, in a dimly lit garage, 3 blocks from the Capitol building where she had chaired briefings for 2 governors. She was just another suspect, another threat, another silhouette in a hoodie near a black vehicle. The image they saw had nothing to do with the woman she was, only the skin she wore. "This isn't a misunderstanding," she said quietly. "It's a mistake with consequences." The taller officer sneered. "Lady, you're not in a position to lecture anyone." She didn't reply. Instead, she shifted slightly, just enough to tap a small button on the underside of her left wrist. A soft vibration pulsed against her skin. 2 seconds. Signal sent. Location confirmed. The emergency protocol tied to her smartwatch had just pinged the Office of Emergency Response, the State Security Division, and the Capitol's own oversight network. Someone was listening now. "You have less than 8 minutes," she said calmly, "before this parking garage is no longer quiet." The younger officer hesitated for the first time. "Did she say, Surgeon General?" he muttered. "Don't fall for it," the older one growled. "They bluff. They always bluff." Maya let the silence stretch. She wasn't bluffing. She was simply waiting. The tragedy wasn't the aggression. It wasn't even the cuffs. It was how unsurprising it all was. That after years of service, after saving lives, leading policy, surviving deployment zones, and directing statewide medical operations, none of it shielded her from suspicion. Not because she did anything wrong, but because someone made a vague call, and 2 men decided they already knew what kind of person she was. In that moment, it didn't matter that she was the highest-ranking public health official in the state. Didn't matter that she had been in uniform, that she held 2 medical degrees, that her badge was government-issued and her clearance level top tier. All that mattered was the color of her skin, the hoodie she wore, and the assumptions they carried. Because in that garage, for those officers, authority didn't come with titles. It came with stereotypes, and Maya Ellison didn't fit theirs, so they didn't see her. But they would. Very soon, Officer Curtis Webb was a man who didn't like being told he was wrong, especially not by someone who looked like Maya Ellison. 46 years old, barrel-chested, and forever posturing like he was still in high school football cleats, Webb had patrolled Capitol grounds for nearly 18 years. He wasn't known for patience, or tact, or paperwork. He was known for gut calls, those quick judgments he prided himself on, the kind that made him believe he could read a person in 5 seconds or less. Hoodie, late evening, black woman near a government vehicle. He didn't need to hear a word. He had already decided who she was. To him, she was a problem, and problems got handled. Beside him, Officer Daniel Ruiz hovered near the edge of nervousness. 25 years old, barely out of training, his uniform still creased from the academy, Ruiz was the kind of officer who followed orders first and asked questions later, if at all. He watched Webb with darting eyes, shifting from Maya to the SUV and back again. His radio crackled on his shoulder, but he didn't reach for it. He kept looking to Webb, the senior officer, the example to follow. Even now, cuffed and calm, Maya wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't yelling or resisting. But Ruiz's training had not prepared him for silence. It had prepared him to escalate. "Do you want to run her name?" he asked, not quite whispering. Webb didn't look at him. He was too busy emptying Maya's bag on the hood of the SUV, her tablet, a sealed folder, a secured badge case, and a Department of Public Health access card with her full name printed clearly across the front. Dr. California Surgeon General. Surgeon General. Webb picked up the badge case and flipped it once. "Could have bought this online," he muttered. Ruiz frowned. "Looks real to me." "She looks like a lot of things," Webb snapped. "I've seen this game before." Ruiz swallowed his words. He knew that tone. It didn't invite debate. Maya, meanwhile, stood against the pillar, her wrists still cuffed, breathing evenly, lips pressed together in a firm, silent line. Her eyes stayed on Webb, not with rage, but with calculation. She was studying him, filing him away. He didn't notice. He didn't think he needed to. "You still haven't answered me," she said softly. "What part of I'm the Surgeon General makes me a suspect?" "You think dropping a title changes anything?" Webb scoffed. "Lady, you're not in a lab coat. You're not in a motorcade. You're standing in a garage next to a government vehicle with no uniform, no escort, and a laptop full of encrypted junk. You expect us to just believe you?" Maya raised an eyebrow. "I expect you to verify." "Don't get smart," Webb warned. "I'm not. I'm being factual. Something you seem to have skipped in your training." Ruiz shifted his weight, uneasily rubbing the back of his neck. He looked at the ID on the ground again. The seal. The signature. The barcode. It didn't look fake, and she didn't sound like she was bluffing. Not even a little. But Webb wasn't backing down, and Ruiz didn't have the spine or the rank to challenge him. Instead, he echoed what he had heard others say. "If you're really who you say you are, why didn't you show ID right away?" Maya tilted her head toward the floor. "It's literally at your boot." Ruiz looked down. The badge hadn't moved. She hadn't lied. He glanced at Webb again. "Maybe we should—" "No." Webb cut him off, voice firm. "She's trying to stall. All this talk, all this calm, it's classic misdirection. They do this to throw you off." "They?" Ruiz regretted the word the second it left his mouth. Webb didn't answer. Maya, however, did. "They," she repeated quietly. "That's the part you should remember when this footage plays back. When you're asked to explain what you meant. When someone asks you why you didn't pause, why you didn't verify, why you cuffed a state official in her own assigned parking structure." Webb turned on her. "You don't get to threaten us." "I'm not threatening," Maya replied. "I'm documenting." That chilled Ruiz more than anything so far, because everything she said was true. Body cams were recording. Surveillance footage from the garage would show the moment she identified herself, the moment they refused to verify, the moment they chose control over protocol. But Webb couldn't see it, or wouldn't. His world was black and white. Either you belonged, or you didn't. And Maya, in her slacks and hoodie, with no obvious markers of status, didn't fit into any image of authority he recognized. Not his version of it. "Here's what I think," he said, pointing a flashlight in her direction again. "You're someone who got their hands on clearance you shouldn't have. Maybe you found that laptop. Maybe you jacked the SUV. Maybe you know someone inside. You've got just enough nerve to sound like you belong, and just enough attitude to fake it." "And what if you're wrong?" Maya asked. He didn't answer, because for Webb, being wrong wasn't an option. Being wrong would mean undoing years of instinct, rethinking every gut decision he'd ever made on patrol. It would mean confronting a system that had never forced him to question himself. Until now. Ruiz looked at Maya again, looked at her wrists, her silence, her posture. Not defeated, but deliberate, professional. She didn't seem afraid. She seemed disappointed. "You've been in law enforcement long?" she asked Ruiz. "Just over a year." She nodded. "Plenty of time to decide what kind of officer you want to be?" That hit harder than it should have. Ruiz lowered his flashlight. His mouth was dry. His heart was in his ears. Because this wasn't a moment anymore. It was a mirror. And in it, he saw someone following, not leading, obeying, not questioning, complicit. Before he could respond, a voice crackled over his radio. Units B3, be advised. State-level executive vehicle approaching lower level. Confirm situation status. Webb grabbed his mic. Under control. Suspect in custody. Possible breach of... But the sentence never finished. The elevator at the far end of the garage dinged. 3 suited men stepped out. Behind them, 2 uniformed state troopers flanked a black car with tinted windows. Webb took a step back. Ruiz froze. The man in front held up a badge. Lieutenant Sam Keller, Office of Emergency Response. Step away from Dr. Ellison immediately. For a moment, no one moved. Webb's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Ruiz uncuffed Maya with hands that now trembled for different reasons. Because now they both saw her. And for the first time all evening, neither officer had a thing to say. The cuffs were too tight. Not enough to injure, but enough to insult. Enough to make a point. Dr. Maya Ellison stood pressed against the cold concrete pillar in the level B3 parking garage, hands behind her back, the metal biting gently into her skin with every breath. She didn't twitch, didn't panic, didn't raise her voice. She wasn't new to this feeling, not the cuffs, but the insult, the misjudgment, the suspicion that came too quickly, the doubt that came too late. She'd known it since her residency, when an older white man in the ER asked if she was the janitor. Known it in the field hospitals of Kandahar, when even fellow medics did a double take before handing her command. She had learned long ago that silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. So she counted her breaths and shifted her left wrist just enough to feel the underside of her smartwatch against her skin. The motion was subtle, deliberate. Her finger tapped twice. 1, 2. The haptic buzz confirmed it. A secure, encrypted alert had been transmitted, her location, ID, title, and distress code, directly to the California Office of Emergency Response and 2 private clearance liaisons on the governor's protective services team. She had designed the protocol herself after an incident 2 years ago when a state health director had been mistaken for a protester while walking into the Capitol through a side entrance. Maya had called it the quiet trigger, a fail-safe for when words weren't enough. For when presence alone wasn't protection. It was a signal born of experience, not paranoia. And tonight, it was already moving faster than these officers realized. She didn't say anything right away. She let Officer Webb finish rummaging through her bag like a man trying to find a lie he'd already decided existed. She let Officer Ruiz keep standing awkwardly to the side, shifting weight between his boots like he was trapped between what he feared and what he felt. Neither of them looked at her. They looked around her, above her, at the tablet, the SUV, the badge they refused to see. Then gently, Maya spoke. You have less than 8 minutes before this place is no longer quiet. Ruiz blinked. What did she just say? Webb smirked. Sounds like a threat. No, Maya replied evenly. It's a countdown. Webb scoffed. Lady, we don't scare that easy. I'm not trying to scare you, she said. I'm giving you time. Time to think. Time to realize that every second you delay verification, every second you mishandle state-issued property, every second these cameras are rolling, this becomes less about your mistake and more about your pattern. She let her words settle, calm and cutting. Webb waved her off, but his movements had slowed. The folder in his hand, marked Confidential State Public Health Infrastructure Plan, Restricted Access, suddenly felt heavier. His eyes darted toward Ruiz, who was now fidgeting with the strap on his flashlight like a man in free fall. Ruiz, Webb snapped, check her damn plates. Ruiz moved to the rear of the SUV, but not with the same blind obedience as before. He glanced over his shoulder at Maya, at the badge still on the ground, at the officer standing beside him like an anchor too heavy to carry. The plates read exactly what they should. State government vehicle, executive branch, registration embedded with digital clearance. He knew what that meant. So did Webb. Still, Webb refused to back off. "You think a government tag proves anything?" he said. "No," Maya replied, calm as ever. "But it's one more thing you ignored." She didn't move, didn't tug at the cuffs, didn't raise her voice. She just stood there, still, centered, waiting, not for validation, but for the inevitable. Because while they were still trying to define her, the system that actually knew her was already in motion. Upstairs, a red light blinked on the control panel at the State Emergency Response Center. One floor above that, a secure line rang in the governor's outer office. A staffer paused a call mid-sentence. In a separate command room, a woman in a tactical jumpsuit opened a second laptop and began tracking the signal, pulling up live surveillance from the Level B3 cameras. In Sacramento, 8 minutes was long enough to change everything. Maya knew it. That's why she waited. Webb paced now, increasingly unsettled. He sensed the shift, but couldn't name it. Ruiz had gone quiet, no longer parroting protocol, but instead questioning whether it had ever been followed. There was a heaviness in the air now, not from threat, but from truth. Because truth, when wrapped in silence, is loudest to the guilty. "You ever serve?" Maya asked Ruiz quietly. He looked at her, startled. "What?" "Military, law enforcement, fire, anything." My uncle was Navy." Maya nodded. "Mine was Army. Taught me how to control my breathing before speaking. Said it makes people nervous when you're calm while they're panicking." She looked at Webb now. "It's working." Webb grunted. "This is ridiculous. We've got procedures." "No," Maya said. "You've got habits, but I follow actual procedures." "Don't start getting smart." "I've been smart since before you learned how to patrol a parking garage," she replied, not angry, just factual. Ruiz's radio chirped again. This time, a voice came through, not a dispatch operator, but someone higher. "Unit B3, status update requested. Responding team ETA, 2 minutes. Webb grabbed the mic. "Negative, we have—" But Maya cut him off with a single glance. Not loud, not furious, just precise. "You've already failed the test," she said. He stared at her. "What test?" "The one where you're supposed to protect before you presume. The one where you verify before you violate." The elevator at the far end of the garage dinged. She didn't even flinch. "I warned you," she said softly. Webb turned just in time to see 3 men in suits emerge from the opening doors, flanked by 2 uniformed state troopers. One of them, a tall man with a trimmed beard and steady eyes, stepped forward, holding up a black leather badge. "Lieutenant Sam Keller, Office of Emergency Response. Step away from the detainee immediately." Ruiz backed up so fast he nearly tripped over Maya's bag. Webb stood frozen, suddenly small in the shadow of the real authority now flooding into the space. Keller's team moved swiftly, with precision, not shouting, not storming, just asserting the kind of power that doesn't need explanation. Maya didn't smirk, didn't smile, just tilted her head slightly as the cuffs came off and the pressure left her wrists. "Are you injured, ma'am?" Keller asked. "Not physically," she replied, flexing her fingers. The pain wasn't in the muscle, it was in the message. That even here, even now, even as the Surgeon General of the 5th largest economy in the world, she still had to activate a silent alarm just to be seen. But she had stayed calm, because calm was her weapon, and it was more than enough. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, but the sound landed like a thunderclap. 3 figures stepped out, clean-cut, steady-eyed men in tailored dark suits, each moving with a precision that made the air feel sharper. Flanking them, Two uniformed state troopers in navy blue tactical gear kept pace, their eyes scanning, their hands relaxed but ready. At first, Officer Curtis Webb didn't react. He didn't move. Maybe he thought they were just passers-by, maybe another department running a drill. But his gut, the one he prided himself on, began to churn. Something in the way those men walked told him this wasn't routine. This wasn't routine. It was response. The tallest of the three, black leather badge already in hand, strode forward with unshakable calm. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Dr. Ellison," he said firmly, nodding toward Maya, who remained motionless beside the concrete pillar. "We received your alert. You are secure now." And then he turned to Webb. "Step away from her. Immediately." Everything stopped. Webb's eyes flicked to Ruiz, who had already stepped back, face pale, mouth slightly open. His hand instinctively hovered near his radio, but it was too late for communication. Too late for recovery. Body cams were rolling. The garage's overhead surveillance had audio. The quiet buzz of Maya's smartwatch had triggered an escalation protocol that had pinged 3 state agencies and a Department of Justice liaison in under 90 seconds. From the moment she tapped that button, the system she had helped build had gone to work, not to protect her because of who she was, but to protect her in case the system failed to recognize her. It had failed. And now the reckoning had arrived. Curtis Webb didn't move. Lieutenant Sam Keller didn't blink. "Officer," he repeated, stepping forward. "This is not optional." Reluctantly, as if wading through wet cement, Webb unclipped the cuffs from Maya's wrists. His hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the cold realization that power was no longer on his side. Maya didn't flinch as the metal slipped free. She rotated her wrists slowly, the skin raw and reddened. Still, she didn't rub them. She didn't wince. Her eyes remained locked on Webb's, unflinching, steady, silent. Ruiz had already backed near the stairwell, breathing through his mouth now, his posture shrinking by the second. He looked at Maya with something between guilt and shame, not just for cuffing her, but for believing it, for not asking questions when he should have, for letting Webb lead him into failure by assumption. "Dr. Ellison," Keller said softly, "are you physically injured?" Maya shook her head. "No," she said, voice even. "Not physically. But her words carried weight. Because what had been bruised wasn't her body. It was the fragile expectation that authority, rank, and service could shield her from this kind of moment. That by climbing high enough, far enough, long enough, she might be exempt from what had happened to others who looked like her. She wasn't. Keller turned to Webb. "Did she resist?" Webb stiffened. She was evasive, uncooperative." "No," Ruiz cut in quietly. "No, sir. She complied. She identified herself. She asked for verification." "And did either of you confirm her ID?" Silence. "I asked a question." Ruiz looked down. "We didn't check it. We assumed—" "Assumed what?" Keller's voice dropped slightly. Not loud, but sharp enough to slice. "That a black woman in a hoodie didn't belong next to a state vehicle? That someone carrying a state-issued device must be a threat unless she looked like one of your commanding officers?" Webb tried to speak. No words came. Keller stepped closer. "You're not going to salvage this with excuses. This is bigger than you now." One of the agents behind him picked up Maya's secure laptop and ID badge from the ground, carefully placing them in an evidence-safe folder. The 2 troopers collected her personal bag, her encrypted phone, and photographed every piece of equipment Webb had touched. Maya finally broke her silence. "I want a full chain of custody log on everything. Serial numbers, fingerprints, body cam timestamps. surveillance pulls, everything. "You'll have it," Keller said. "A formal internal review has already begun, and the Attorney General's office has been briefed." Still standing near the wall, Ruiz finally found his voice. "Sir, I didn't mean, I didn't know who she was." "No," Maya said softly, turning to him. "You didn't see who I was." That distinction landed with force. Because Ruiz hadn't drawn his weapon, he hadn't pushed her, but he had followed. He had let his fear fill in the blanks that training should have addressed. He had watched her badge hit the floor and chosen not to bend. And now he stood there, drowning in the weight of a silence that wasn't hers, but his. Lieutenant Keller turned toward the parking exit. "We'll escort Dr. Ellison to the command vehicle. Officers, you will remain here until the Capitol Police's Office of Internal Accountability arrives." Webb jerked upright. "Wait, we're being investigated?" "No," Keller said flatly. "You're being documented. You'll find out by morning whether it becomes something more." Ruiz sank into himself. Webb just stood there, jaw clenched, looking for someone to save him from a moment he had created. Gated. Maya walked past them without a single backward glance. No threats, no raised voice, no headline-hungry soundbite. Just poise, just truth, just a quiet storm they couldn't ignore. Inside the command vehicle, a high-security SUV modified for executive response, an officer handed Maya a clean towel for her wrists and a bottle of water. Another passed her a secure phone already connected to the Office of Emergency Response. "This is Dr. Ellison," she said as she took the call. "Doctor," came the voice on the other end, steady and alert. "We received the body cam footage and pulled the parking structure surveillance. The civilian who called in the complaint is irrelevant. What those officers did, that's the focus now." Maya didn't nod, didn't smile, just leaned back in the leather seat, eyes closed briefly. "I want protocol," she said. "Not apologies, not press coverage, not damage control. Protocol, top to bottom. I want this logged." "Yes, doctor, already underway." The call ended. The vehicle rolled out of the garage, the yellow sodium level B3 fading behind them. And inside, Maya sat in silence. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't fought. She hadn't demanded a moment's respect. But the state had listened, and the moment had cracked something wide open. The SUV cruised out of the parking garage like a shadow dissolving into night. Rain traced soft lines across the windows, catching light from street lamps and traffic signals as Sacramento blurred past. Inside, Dr. Maya Ellison sat in the second row, upright, composed, but quiet. Her wrists, raw from the cuffs, rested in her lap. She hadn't covered them, hadn't even rubbed them. She wanted to feel them, not for pain, but for proof. Proof that even after a 25-year career of public service, after 2 doctorates, after tours of duty in Afghanistan and global health briefings in Geneva, her presence could still be mistaken for a threat in a hoodie. She watched the city go by like an old memory. Buildings she knew, blocks she'd walked, rooms where she'd made decisions that impacted tens of thousands of lives. But all it had taken to erase that history was an assumption, a sideways glance, a single vague phone call, and 2 men too convinced of their own instincts to stop and ask. They hadn't seen a doctor, or a general, or a leader. They had seen a body, and that was enough. The command vehicle made a sharp turn onto N Street, just past the Capitol Dome. The same Capitol where Maya had once been asked to speak on wildfire resilience and trauma response. The same one where she'd stood with Governor Serrano during the pandemic's second wave, issuing steady, firm guidance while the rest of the country descended into noise. Where she had penned policies, coordinated disaster response logistics, and helped pass the state's largest public health reform in over a generation. None of it had mattered in that garage. Not her education, Berkeley undergrad, Stanford MD, a DRPH from Johns Hopkins, not her service as a trauma medic in Kandahar, where she'd stitched up children under mortar fire, not her field hospital work in post-earthquake Haiti, not her calm leadership during the 2024 20 wildfires when she turned a high school gym into a functional triage center in under 6 hours, not the plaques on her wall or the awards in her office, or the fact that she had personally trained over 300 medical responders during the pandemic's peak. Because she wasn't wearing that history, she was wearing a hoodie. And for the officers in Level B3, that was enough to cancel the rest. She leaned her head back against the seat and let her thoughts drift, not to the sting of the cuffs, but to her father. Eugene Ellison, Vietnam veteran, bus mechanic by trade, philosopher by temperament. He used to tell her as a girl in East Oakland, "People won't see what you've done. They'll see what they're afraid of." And he was right. He always was. As a kid, Maya used to ride with him on weekends to the VA hospital. He wasn't getting treatment. He just liked to bring donuts to the front desk staff. "Kindness is how we armor up," he'd say. "They can call you whatever they want, but they can't stop you from being who you are." She had believed that then, and she still believed it now. But belief didn't change reality. The reality was, when she walked into the briefing that morning in a crisp blue blazer and service pin, people stood a little straighter. When she spoke, the room quieted. When she tapped her notes or cleared her throat, senior officials leaned in. Because then, she was in costume. Then, she looked the part. But after hours of crisis planning and field reporting, she had changed. Blazer off. Hair pulled back. Hoodie zipped halfway. Slacks, boots, a medical bag slung over one shoulder. Not because she wanted to disappear, but because she wanted to breathe, to decompress, to walk to her car without being Dr. Ellison, to have, for once, a moment of anonymity. But anonymity, for someone who looks like her, is not safety. It is suspicion. The vehicle slowed in front of her townhouse in East Sacramento. Modest, red brick, lavender bushes by the porch. Nothing extravagant, but hers. Home. A place where she could finally remove the invisible weight she carried. And yet, tonight, she didn't move. Not right away. The engine idled softly. The trooper in the passenger seat turned around. "Dr. Ellison, we're here." "I know," she said. But still, she stared out the window. Because the line between who she was and what they saw had never felt so razor-thin. She thought back to Kandahar, August 2009, when her field unit was ambushed en route to a refugee corridor. A Humvee flipped, caught fire. Maya had dragged a wounded corporal 20 yards through shrapnel and heat, shielding him with her own body while coordinating radio backup. She didn't freeze then. She didn't flinch. But tonight, what nearly broke her wasn't the threat of violence. It was the quiet erosion of dignity. That moment when she looked into Ruiz's eyes and saw confusion. Not about her words, but about why she was still calm. As if her composure made her suspicious. As if fear was the only thing that could make her human. She stepped out of the vehicle slowly, her boots touching the damp sidewalk. The air smelled like wet cement and jasmine. She walked up the front steps, unlocked the door, and entered without turning on the lights. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down. Office of the Surgeon General, Preliminary Incident Report logged. Subject: Capitol Garage Detainment. Body cam footage uploaded. Status: Under review. Governor notified. She powered off the phone. Enough. In the kitchen, she poured a glass of water, took one long sip, then opened the drawer next to her fridge. Inside, a collection of mementos, service pins, letters, photos, one of her in uniform, kneeling beside a rescued child in Haiti. Another, her favorite, of her and her father, both smiling over a chessboard in the living room. She placed the red-cuffed wristbands from tonight in the same drawer. Not to forget, but to remember. To remember that even after all this time, there are still places she cannot walk without someone needing proof that she belongs. But she doesn't need to prove anything. Not anymore. She knows who she is. She's the girl from East Oakland who graduated top of her med school class. The medic who held the line in combat zones. The doctor who outlasted 4 health secretaries. The public servant who, tonight, reminded the state of California exactly who keeps it standing. Her hoodie didn't erase her rank. Their assumptions just failed to recognize it. And next time, she thought, she wouldn't change clothes at all. Let them see both. Because that's the problem, isn't it? People only respect what they recognize. And Maya Ellison had built a life that demanded recognition, whether they liked it or not. The morning after the incident, Sacramento woke up to a headline that sparked with the friction of disbelief. State Surgeon General detained in Capitol garage. Misidentified, mistreated, and ignored. By 7:15, the Capitol buzzed with whispers. By 9 o'clock, the governor's office had received more than a dozen press inquiries. By 10, the body cam footage had been quietly requested by 3 separate departments, and by noon, it had been reviewed, frame by frame. It was all there. No resistance, no aggression, no raised voice. Just one woman, standing still, identifying herself with calm precision, while 2 officers ignored her words and tightened the cuffs. The machinery of accountability had begun to hum. Not roar, not sprint, but hum. At 1:15 that afternoon, Officers Curtis Webb and Daniel Ruiz sat across from Captain Elena Parra, Internal Affairs Investigator for Capitol Security. The room was bright, too bright, its white walls and polished floor offering no place to hide. A single folder lay on the table. Inside, transcripts, timestamps, camera angles, and the official audio file, synchronized with Maya Ellison's alert and state response logs. Parra hadn't said much when she walked in. She didn't need to. Her silence had weight. She turned to Webb first. "Walk me through it." Webb crossed his arms, his tone defensive. "We got a call about a suspicious person loitering near state vehicles. No description beyond gender and race. We responded. Found a woman near a government SUV, dressed casually. She didn't present ID. Gave us attitude." "Attitude?" Parra asked, tilting her head. "She was evasive." Parra slid a still frame across the table. Maya, mid-sentence, both hands raised. "She stated her name here," Parra said. "And here," she flipped the page, "she said she was the Surgeon General. You replied, quote, 'Save it.'" Webb's jaw tightened. "People say all kinds of things." "She also dropped her ID at your feet. You never looked down." "She could have planted it." "Do you often assume state employees are planting identification cards with real serials and Pentagon clearance barcodes?" No answer. Parra turned to Ruiz. The younger officer sat straighter, his nerves written across his face in quiet sweat. "Officer Ruiz," she said, "do you believe Dr. Ellison was evasive?" "No, ma'am," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "She offered identification?" "Yes." "She resisted?" "No." "Did she raise her voice?" "No." "Did she ever threaten you?" He hesitated. "No, ma'am. She was calm the whole time." Parra paused. "You didn't stop Webb?" "I should have asked more questions," Ruiz said, swallowing. I followed his lead. I just assumed he was right." "Did anything she said or did justify detention?" Silence. Ruiz looked at the table. "No." Across the street, the footage played on silent loop in a closed-door meeting with the Capitol's Senior Oversight Committee. 5 minutes and 46 seconds of steady, undeniable proof. Maya's voice, low and level. Her statement of identity. The dropped badge. The smartwatch tap. her final warning. And then, just as she had said, 8 minutes later, the elevator opened. By 5 o'clock, the story had moved beyond Sacramento. By 6, the governor's press secretary issued a statement. "We are reviewing the incident involving Dr. Maya Ellison with the seriousness and urgency it deserves. State employees, regardless of appearance, rank, or dress, must be treated with respect, especially by those tasked with their protection." It wasn't just a headline now. It was a question. If this could happen to her, what about everyone else? A viral clip from a local anchor broke it down. This wasn't about a gun or a threat, or even a refusal to comply. This was about optics, assumptions, a hoodie, brown skin, and a system that still chooses instinct over evidence. The public response exploded. Veterans who had served alongside Maya posted photos from Afghanistan, calling her the calmest under fire. Nurses remembered her field work in Fresno during the pandemic and how she showed up at 3 in the morning with supplies and stayed until the last patient was seen. Students from her Stanford lectures shared handwritten notes she left on their final papers, always signed, "In service, Dr. E." It wasn't just the public defending her, it was everyone who had ever known her. Inside the Capitol, phones rang nonstop. Why weren't the officers trained to verify before escalating? Why didn't they scan her badge? Why was compliance still not enough? Captain Parra finalized her report by 8:30 that night. It was clinical, sharp, undeniable. Subject identified herself clearly within 65 seconds of initial contact. Officers failed to verify identification despite multiple opportunities. Subject complied fully with commands. No threats made. Detention unjustified. Search unlawful. The findings landed on the Capitol Police Chief's desk by 9:15. 30 minutes later, Webb was placed on administrative leave pending formal disciplinary proceedings. Ruiz was given the option to resign quietly or face a full hearing. By midnight, his resignation was filed. But Maya Ellison didn't post a statement, didn't speak to the press, didn't hold a press conference. While the world circled the story like vultures around a spectacle, she sat in her home, in a quiet room lit by one lamp, and wrote 3 sentences in a notebook. The system didn't break. It operated exactly how it was built. Now we dismantle it. She closed the book and sipped her tea. The wheels of accountability were moving, slowly, but visibly, because something deeper had shifted, beyond policies and procedures. The footage had done more than confirm wrongdoing. It had pulled back a curtain. It showed not just a mistake, but a mindset, one that reduced a decorated public servant to a suspicious person because she didn't look the part. And Maya, by staying still, by staying calm, by refusing to perform rage, had forced everyone to see it. No yelling, no slamming of doors, just fact, just silence, sharpened into consequence. 3 days passed before Dr. Maya Ellison spoke publicly. 3 days of escalating press coverage, op-eds, round-table debates, and talking heads dissecting her silence like it was a strategy, a shield, a statement in itself. In those 72 hours, the incident had grown beyond the garage, spilling into evening news anchors' closing monologues, trending hashtags, and awkward staff meetings in police departments from Oakland to Tallahassee. Everyone had something to say about Maya Ellison. Except Maya Ellison. She didn't tweet. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't issue demands. She waited, long enough for the noise to swell and echo, long enough for people to start asking, why hasn't she said anything yet? Is she planning to sue? Will she speak at the Capitol? And then, on the morning of the 4th day, just past 6:30, her office quietly posted a letter. No logo, no headline, no commentary, just plain white background, black serif font, 6 sentences. I did not resist. I complied. And still, I was cuffed, questioned, and treated as a threat. This isn't about what I said. It's about what they chose not to hear, and what so many others never survived long enough to explain. No flourish, no anger, no fire. Just truth, distilled to its sharpest point. Within minutes, the statement was everywhere. By 8 o'clock, national networks had reprinted the letter in full. By 9, it was being read aloud on air, word for word, with anchors pausing between lines, trying not to editorialize, trying not to add more than what was already there. Because the power of Maya's words wasn't in what they argued. It was in what they confirmed. She had complied. She had followed the rules. She had identified herself. And none of it mattered. Veterans reposted the letter with photos of Maya in fatigues, in combat boots, in field tents. She treated me after I was hit in Helmand. She saved my leg, one Marine wrote. She didn't flinch in gunfire, but 2 officers thought she was a threat in a hoodie. Doctors reposted it from emergency rooms, some holding signs. I am Maya Ellison, and I would have been cuffed too. Professors, civil rights attorneys, nurses, city council members. They shared the letter with hashtags that didn't scream, but whispered just loud enough to cut through. Treaty an house. So, complied anyway. C.E. She told you who she was. This is why we're tired. And still, Maya didn't follow up. No interviews, no clarifications, no selfies with activists or meetings with celebrities. Her silence was deliberate. Because when you've done everything right and still end up against a wall, it's not your job to shout louder. It's the world's job to start listening. Inside the Capitol, the statement hit even harder. Legislators who had quietly watched the fallout now found themselves with inboxes full of constituents demanding answers. The footage had shown the act, but the letter revealed the wound. Maya hadn't just been detained. She had been dismissed, dehumanized by assumption, by habit, by a reflex that turned years of service and stature into suspicion within seconds. And she had named it, without even naming them. Officer Daniel Ruiz saw the letter while sitting at his kitchen table, resignation papers already signed, but not yet mailed. His wife had gone quiet after reading it. She didn't cry, just stared at him for a long, heavy moment before asking, "Did she really say all that to you?" That calm? He nodded. "And you didn't listen?" He didn't answer. Because that, right there, was the failure. Not the cuffs, not the silence. The choice not to listen. Curtis Webb saw the letter too, mid-scroll on a news app, sandwiched between stories about inflation and wildfire season. He laughed bitterly, muttering something about how people always twisted things, but even as he dismissed the words, they hung in the air. I did not resist. I complied. And still, that's what stuck. Still, she was cuffed. Still, she was questioned. Still, she was seen not for who she was, but for what they feared she could be. Back in Maya's office, her staff watched the response unfold like a slow tidal wave. Her assistant had asked if she wanted to respond to the thousands of emails pouring in. Maya shook her head. "Let it sit," she said. Because Maya understood something too many forgot. Not all power comes from speaking louder. Some of it comes from speaking less and letting truth echo in the silence that follows. Her statement didn't call for reform. It was reform. A blueprint in restraint. A warning wrapped in grace. She hadn't written it to win sympathy. She had written it to tell the truth. And the truth was simple. In a system that still struggles to believe black women when they tell you who they are, dignity isn't given. It's defended. By staying calm, by being factual, by refusing to make her pain performative. Later that day, a former federal judge reposted the letter with a caption that read, "In 35 years, I've never seen a statement this short deliver such a precise indictment of institutional failure." He wasn't wrong. It was an indictment not of just two officers, but of a culture. A training pipeline. A set of unspoken rules about who gets presumed innocent and who gets presumed suspicious. Maya had lived through it, documented it, and now, in 6 lines, had made the entire state and country confront it. That night, she went home and sat on her back patio with a glass of mint tea wrapped in a blanket. No news on, no phone in hand, just the sound of crickets and wind moving through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the faint rhythm of footsteps from joggers passing by. Life was still happening, but it was different now. The world had heard her, not because she'd shouted, but because she hadn't needed to, because her restraint had cut deeper than outrage ever could, because silence, when used precisely, isn't weakness, it's power, and Maya Ellison wielded it like a scalpel. The consequences did not arrive with sirens or speeches. They came like everything else in Maya Ellison's world, measured, intentional, and quiet. 10 days after her statement circled the globe, Officer Curtis Webb was officially terminated from Capitol Security. No press release, no podium. Just a single-line internal memo distributed to the department. Sergeant Curtis Webb has been relieved of duty, effective immediately, following violations of protocol and departmental conduct standards. His locker was emptied before sunrise. By the time his name hit the afternoon wires, he was already gone, scrubbed from the roster, badge deactivated, access revoked. There was no farewell, no ceremony, only silence. And in that silence, a message. Webb, who had spent nearly 2 decades swaggering through government garages with the kind of authority that rarely got questioned, had been undone not by scandal or resistance, but by calm. By a woman who didn't raise her voice, who didn't push back, who simply spoke the truth and let the footage confirm it. He tried to defend himself in private, telling anyone who'd still listen that it had been an honest mistake, that she didn't look like a general. But the tide had already turned. Fellow officers avoided eye contact in the hallway. A few even said it plainly. You did this to yourself. His uniform hung in his garage for 2 weeks before he finally boxed it up and left it at the Salvation Army. Officer Daniel Ruiz never made it that far. He resigned 3 days before Webb's firing. Quietly. No legal battle. No protest. Just a handwritten note slipped under his supervisor's office door. I followed when I should have questioned. I froze when I should have spoken. I saw her, but I didn't believe her. I'm sorry. Adert to Ruiz. It wasn't sent to Maya directly. She only learned of it when the IA report was closed. Even then, she didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because Ruiz's apology wasn't for public consumption. It was private. A reckoning between himself and the part of him that would carry the weight of that day for the rest of his life. His resignation wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of his accountability. But the ripple didn't stop with 2 officers. What happened in the Level B3 parking garage triggered a procedural audit across every security checkpoint connected to state facilities. Maya never asked for it. She never once stood in front of a microphone and demanded policy change. But in her silence, she had exposed the fragility of assumptions that lived in plain sight. So the state moved, not out of panic, but out of necessity. Within 21 days of the incident, new statewide training protocols were issued for all Capitol officers and state security contractors. Among the updates, mandatory verification of ID before initiating physical restraint, unless imminent threat is observed. Quarterly de-escalation training with a special module on unconscious bias. Real-time supervisory review for all detainments conducted on government property. And a new segment added to every onboarding session. Perception versus reality. The Maya Ellison case study. In that final module, cadets were shown the raw body cam footage. No edits, no narration, just the full 7 minutes and 42 seconds Maya's steady tone, her clear identification, her compliance, and the officer's failure to see what was right in front of them. Then they listened to the 911 call. It was the voice that started it all. A woman, never named publicly, never shown, calling from her office window overlooking the garage. "Hi, yes, I'd like to report someone suspicious. She's standing near a black SUV, just kind of lingering. Doesn't look like she belongs down there. Hoodie? Backpack? I don't know. Something just feels off." That was all it took. 3 sentences, full of coded language. 3 sentences that nearly turned one of the most respected public health leaders in the country into a threat. The caller didn't see Maya's credentials, didn't see her car tag, didn't see her badge, but still she was believed. Her voice, the quiet certainty of a civilian simply reporting a feeling, was the match. And so, Maya's story didn't just become training on what not to do. It became a warning about how it starts. The recording was now used across law enforcement agencies in California. Recruits were asked to write down everything they learned from the call. What stood out, what they assumed, what they missed. Maya never asked for the recording to be played, but she didn't stop it either. Because while she believed in privacy, she believed even more in prevention. The anonymous woman who made the call was never revealed, never contacted, never disciplined. That wasn't the point. This wasn't about punishment. It was about exposure, about creating a moment in the training room that forced people to confront the cost of reflex. Because if Maya hadn't had clearance, if she hadn't stayed calm, if help hadn't arrived exactly when it did, what then? That question hung in every classroom where the tape was played. And still Maya remained quiet. No book tour, no speaking circuit, no interviews on morning television. Instead, she met privately with the governor's chief of staff to recommend a third-party oversight board for Capitol security. She consulted with the Department of Health to add language to its anti-bias training for public workers. She agreed to write a curriculum for med school students on calm under threat, merging psychological safety with operational clarity. Every action quiet, every move deliberate. Because Maya Ellison never wanted to be a symbol. She wanted to be a reminder. That dignity isn't a reward for status. It's a right. And when it's denied, even for a minute, consequences must follow. Not as punishment, but as restoration. Because systems don't change when we yell at them. They change when the truth becomes too quiet to ignore. And Maya's truth, spoken with steady breath and unwavering calm, had already done what no policy memo ever could. It made people look again, at who we trust, at who we question, and at the price of getting it wrong. It was nearly midnight when Dr. Maya Ellison returned to Level B3. The garage was empty now, silent, but for the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the soft tick of her boots on the concrete. The same echo that, weeks earlier, had preceded guns, shouts, and humiliation. But tonight, there were no shouts, no drawn weapons, no assumptions barking through the dark. Just Maya, standing exactly where she had been forced against the pillar, hands behind her back, wrists cuffed not by justice, but by instinct. She didn't bring a camera. She didn't take a photo for a future slideshow or keynote. She didn't post a poetic caption or press record on her phone. She simply stood there, one hand resting against the same concrete column, her skin tracing over the faint spot where her badge had dropped to the ground. She had no need to immortalize the moment in images. It was already imprinted in her bones. So much had changed in the 26 days since that night. Policies revised, officers removed, state protocols restructured. Her words, those 6 quiet sentences, were now printed inside academy binders and pinned to department briefing boards across the state. But standing here, alone, Maya didn't think of change. She thought of clarity, of how quickly the world could strip you of your name, your record, your decades of work, and how calmly she had refused to let them. She inhaled once, deep and slow. The air still smelled faintly of oil and old rain. Then she turned and walked away. No headlines followed. No one tweeted about it. She didn't speak of the visit to anyone. Because legacy, she believed, doesn't live in spectacle. It lives in the moments after the noise, after the apologies, after the echo fades, and only you are left to decide what parts of the experience you carry forward, and what parts you leave buried in the floor. 2 days later, she stood before a group of 22 public health interns in a glass-walled conference room on the 12th floor of the State Health Building. They were fresh faces, some still in school, others just weeks into their assignments, eager, idealistic, notebooks already open. They had expected a lecture on infrastructure, maybe crisis logistics, or post-disaster care planning. Instead, Maya told them a story. She never named names, never said garage or officer or cuffed. She didn't have to. She simply described the feeling of not being believed, even after offering every credential. Of watching someone decide who you are before you speak. Of being right, but not heard. Then she paused and looked around the room. "Your title," she said, "may carry weight, but your skin will always walk in first." Silence followed, but not the empty kind, the heavy kind, the kind that settles on your chest and stays there. One intern, a young black woman from Modesto, raised her hand. "What did you do in that moment, when they didn't see you?" Maya didn't answer right away. Then she smiled faintly. "I didn't panic. I didn't shout. I held the line." She tapped her temple. "Up here. That's where power starts. Not in your badge, not in your rank, not even in your voice. In your knowing." Another hand rose. "Were you angry?" Maya gave a soft laugh, not amused but knowing. "Yes," she said, "but anger isn't the only tool we have. Sometimes it's not even the most effective one. What they expect, what they're trained to respond to, is anger. So I gave them something else." "What?" "Stillness." There it was again, that quiet. And in it, the lesson. Because power doesn't always come dressed in volume. It comes in the refusal to be reduced, in the precision of a word spoken clearly, in knowing when not to move, when not to defend yourself, because truth doesn't need defense. After the session ended, a few interns lingered. One young man, Latino, 22, stopped at the doorway. "Dr. Ellison," he said, "do you think justice was served?" She looked at him carefully. "Justice?" she repeated. "No, but consequences were." Then, before he could ask more, she added, "Justice is a system. Mine is still catching up." The next morning, she returned to her office, where a folder waited on her desk, marked Confidential. Implementation Phase, Bias Training Reform Draft 01. She didn't open it right away. She just sat at her desk, looked out the window toward the Capitol dome, and let the moment breathe. She hadn't filed a civil suit, hadn't given an exclusive, hadn't used the incident to elevate herself. But the state had changed because of her, and it would continue to. She was already in conversation with 2 state legislators about sponsoring new oversight protocols, not under her name, but through their offices. She was helping draft a module for law enforcement on what presence actually looks like. She was writing language that would require officers to pass implicit bias reviews before carrying weapons on state property. None of it would bear her signature, but all of it would bear her mark. And somewhere, in a dozen training rooms around the country, the voice of that anonymous caller, the one who said Maya looked out of place, would be played on loop, not as shame, but as instruction. A reminder of how easily perception can become policy, and how devastating the results can be. That was the legacy Maya Ellison chose. Not vengeance, not rage, but restraint. Because the most enduring form of power isn't what you show others. It's what you know they can never take from you. She knew who she was. Before the garage, inside it, and every day after, even when they didn't see her, even when they chose not to. And that knowledge, that unshakable certainty, was what would live longest. Not the headlines, not the footage, not even the statement, but the silence that came after, the silence where the system listened. And finally changed. What happened to Dr. Maya Ellison is more than just the story of one woman in a parking garage. It's a mirror held up to America. It reminds us that no matter how many degrees you've earned, tours you've served, or years you've given to your country, you can still be reduced to someone else's assumption in less than 10 seconds. It teaches us that power isn't only in titles, uniforms, or badges. It's in knowing who you are when the world tries to tell you otherwise. Maya's calm in the face of humiliation wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was precision. And it worked. Officers were held accountable. Policies changed. Training improved. All without her raising her voice or chasing a camera. But here's the truth. Every American citizen needs to take away. This wasn't just about Maya. It's about a system that, left unchallenged, will keep repeating itself. It's about the thousands of people who don't have a smartwatch, state clearance, or the benefit of cameras rolling. It's about the danger of acting on instinct when instinct is shaped by bias, and the cost of not listening when someone tells you exactly who they are. We all have a role to play in dismantling that reflex, whether you wear a badge, sit behind a desk, work in a school, or stand in a checkout line. We have to start by listening, by verifying before judging, by calling out the casual assumptions that have real, sometimes deadly, consequences. Because if you think this can't happen to you or someone you love, remember, it happened to the Surgeon General of California in her own assigned garage. And it took less than 8 minutes to go from professional to suspect. That's how fast it can happen. That's how close it always is. So, if this story made you think, share it. If it made you angry, let that anger move you to action. And if it made you see something you hadn't seen before, don't look away now. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the real stories that matter, the ones that pull the curtain back on what's happening every day in America. Like the video so more people see it. Share it so the conversation spreads beyond headlines and hashtags. The lesson is simple. Listen first. Act with facts. And never underestimate the power of calm truth to change the course of events.